The soil samples didn't make sense. A forest floor that had been compacted and lifeless for over 3 decades was suddenly showing signs of active biological recovery. Mycorrhizal networks were re-establishing. Moisture retention had increased by 40%. Native seedlings were germinating in ground that hadn't supported new growth since the 1980s. The forestry team in Brandenburg couldn't explain it through any of their scheduled interventions. No machines had touched this section. No soil treatment had been applied. Then they checked the camera traps. 17 wild boar, moving through the dead pine stands every night. Rooting, turning, breaking, doing in 8 months what 30 years of managed forestry had failed to do. Brandenburg is not a dramatic landscape. No mountains, no coastline, just flat, quiet land stretching across northeastern Germany. And for most of the 20th century, pine trees. Millions of them, planted in uniform rows by East German foresters in the 1950s and 1960s, not because pine was native to this region, but because pine grew fast, sold well, and filled quotas. By 1975, nearly 70% of Brandenburg's forests were monoculture pine plantations. One species, one age, one purpose. The soil beneath them never stood a chance. Pine needles drop in thick layers. They acidify the ground as they decompose. Year after year, that acidity builds. It kills the fungal networks that native forests depend on. It drives out the insects that break down organic matter. It leaves the soil sealed, dense, gray, and biologically empty. By the early 1990s, soil scientists working in the Filming region of Brandenburg were recording pH levels so low that most native plant species could no longer germinate. The ground wasn't just poor, it was locked. Then came the storms. In 2002 and again in 2007, severe wind events tore through Brandenburg's pine plantations. Thousands of hectares of trees came down. What was left wasn't a forest, it was a graveyard of broken trunks and exposed root plates. The State Forestry Office assessed the damage and reached a difficult conclusion. Replanting pine would repeat the same cycle. The soil couldn't support meaningful biodiversity, not without intervention. But the kind of intervention they were considering had never been formally tested in this region before, and several senior officials thought it was a serious mistake. The proposal came from a small team of ecologists at the University of Greifswald. Their argument was straightforward. The soil wasn't sick because of what was in it, it was sick because nothing was moving through it. For decades, large animals had been absent from Brandenburg's managed forests. No rooters, no grazers, no disturbance, just silence and compaction. The ecologists pointed to older soil studies from the Boar forest in Poland, one of the last truly wild forests in Europe. There, wild boar populations had maintained active soil turnover for centuries. Their rooting behavior broke up compacted layers. It mixed decomposing organic matter back into the mineral soil. It created thousands of small disturbance patches where native seeds could finally reach bare ground. The proposal was to introduce a managed group of 17 wild boar into a 340-hectare section of damaged forest near the town of Luckau. The State Forestry Office was not convinced. Wild boar were already considered a problem species across rural Brandenburg. Farmers in surrounding areas had spent years dealing with crop damage from existing boar populations. Deliberately introducing more felt politically difficult. One senior official called it, in a regional meeting, rewarding a pest. The ecologists held their position. They weren't asking for a permanent population, they were asking for a controlled trial, fenced, monitored, and reversible. 17 animals, one clearly defined area. 2 years. After 3 months of internal debate, the Forestry Office agreed. The boar arrived in March 2019, transported in reinforced crates from a wildlife management facility in Saxony, released into a forest that, by every measurable standard, was dead. What the cameras recorded in the first 90 days was not what anyone had prepared for. The first monitoring report came in May 2019, 6 weeks after release. The ecologists expected gradual progress. What they found was aggressive, systematic disturbance across nearly 18 hectares. The boar hadn't scattered randomly through the 340-hectare enclosure. They had moved in coordinated groups, working the same sections repeatedly, returning to areas they had already rooted and rooting deeper. The soil in those sections had been turned to an average depth of 22 centimeters. That doesn't sound significant, But in a forest floor sealed by decades of pine needle acidification, 22 centimeters is the difference between dead ground and living ground. Beneath that layer, the mineral soil was intact, untouched, waiting. The boar had reached it. By August 2019, soil pH readings in rooted sections had shifted from 3.8 to 5.1. A change of that magnitude normally takes decades of managed lime treatment. The boar had done it in 5 months. But here is where the monitoring data produced its first, genuinely unexpected result. The ecologists had assumed the boar would avoid the densest sections of fallen timber. They didn't. They moved directly into the debris fields, the tangled zones of collapsed trunks and broken root plates from the 2007 storm damage. They were targeting the beetles, specifically the larvae of saproxylic beetles, species that live inside rotting wood. High protein, abundant, buried inside logs that hadn't been touched in 12 years. As the boar broke open the rotting timber to reach the larvae, they were simultaneously fragmenting the wood, accelerating decomposition, releasing nutrients that had been locked inside those logs for over a decade. The forest wasn't just being disturbed, it was being unlocked from 2 directions at once. And by October 2019, something appeared in the soil data that no one had included in the original project proposal. The October soil samples showed mycorrhizal fungal activity, not traces. Active, spreading networks across 34 hectares of previously dead forest floor. Mycorrhizal fungi are the foundation of a functioning forest. They connect root systems, they move water and nutrients between trees. Without them, a forest is just trees standing in dirt. Brandenburg's pine monoculture had suppressed these networks for 40 years. The boar had partially restored them in 7 months. The lead ecologist from Greifswald, Dr. Markus Albrecht, later described the October readings as the moment the project changed character. It had started as a soil disturbance trial. It was becoming something larger. By spring 2020, the rooted sections were showing germination, not pine seedlings. Pedunculate oak, silver birch, wood anemone, native species that hadn't established in this area since before the plantation era. Their seeds had been lying dormant in the mineral soil, some for an estimated 20 to 30 years. The boar hadn't planted them. They had simply removed what was blocking them. By the end of the 2-year trial period in March 2021, independent soil assessments recorded the following across the 340-hectare enclosure. Organic matter content had increased by 34% in rooted zones. Ground beetle diversity had risen from 11 recorded species to 29. Soil moisture retention was up 40% compared to the unrooted control sections. And 2 hectares of genuine mixed species regeneration had established the first natural woodland recruitment recorded in this part of Brandenburg in over 3 decades. The State Forestry Office reviewed the findings in April 2021. The same official who had called the project rewarding a pest requested a second phase. But the ecologists had already identified a problem, one that the success of the trial had directly created. The problem was simple. The trial had worked too well. The 17 boar had reproduced inside the enclosure. By March 2021, there weren't 17 animals. There were 43. The fencing that had made the project politically acceptable was now containing a population more than twice the original size. Releasing them into the surrounding landscape meant conflict with local farmers. Keeping them fenced meant the enclosure could no longer sustain them without causing overgrazing damage to the very regeneration they had created. The ecologists had solved one problem and inherited another. This tension between what wild animals can do and what managed landscapes can tolerate is not unique to Brandenburg. It is the central, unresolved question of European rewilding. Poland's Białowieża, Romania's Carpathians, Germany's own fragmented forest corridors. Every serious restoration project eventually reaches this point. The moment when nature's recovery outpaces the political framework built around it. The Brandenburg trial was formally concluded in September 2021. Its findings were submitted to the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation. They are now part of the reference literature for soil restoration methodology across 17 countries in the European Union. 43 boar, 340 hectares, 2 years. Those numbers sit inside policy documents that will shape how degraded forests across an entire continent are managed for the next generation. The soil beneath a dead pine forest in Luckau Brandenburg remembered what it was supposed to be. It just needed something to break it open. If stories like this one matter to you, the quiet ones, the ones that don't make headlines but reshape the ground beneath our feet, there are more waiting here.